Let me clarify something. The reason my copy of Crackdown 3 is a physical copy is because it's not an early review copy. I walked into a store and bought it over a week early. Thank God I live in Manhattan. With that being said, even though I'm not under an embargo, I'm going to try to keep my footage to the first half of the game to avoid spoilers. Now, let me get real. Crackdown 3 is not the disaster so many people thought it would be. The prevailing opinion on both Twitter and forums is that the practically 6-year wait for the game, the multitude of delays, simply wasn't going to be worth it. It was going to flop. Most of this was based on pre-release footage that was making the rounds on YouTube. I myself went to the game with tempered expectations as a result, and that was probably for the best. Crackdown 3 is a game that makes me glad I don't do traditional scored reviews. It is maybe the biggest mixed bag of the year thus far, and some of the highest highs and the lowest lows. But let me preface the meat of this piece by saying this. I will not be doing a full review style video on Crackdown 3 outside of this pseudo review video. I will not do it. And that's what this piece is about. The reason I got up from playing this game yesterday and finally said, I need to change my plans. What I have in my hands right now is my copy of Crackdown 3. The only reason I'm showing you this is to show you that yes, not only am I not embargoed, but I did just walk into a store and buy the game. For those of you that are interested in how I did that, it's really as simple as living in a place like Manhattan with a bunch of stores that don't really care about street date. But that's not the point and not the reason I'm showing you this in its entirety. There's an image on the back of the box of a car driving away from an explosion, and it got me thinking as I was sitting down to do this portion of the video about how much of a microcosm that image really is for the game. There are instances, take driving for example, where you're going to get one vehicle that's really cool and does really awesome stuff, and you're going to enjoy your time with that vehicle. I don't want to spoil it for you, even though I think it's in the trailer. But other than that, driving in Crackdown is a tank-like slog, which I'll talk about. And I think that is kind of a microcosm of what Crackdown 3 is. There are momentary glimpses of absolute enjoyment, and the rest of that is going to be, or the rest of the game is going to be for a very specific type of person. And that kind of is why I'm only doing this video. I originally was going to do an impressions video and then a much longer review that would have had some of this stuff in it, but instead I decided to combine those two videos because I don't think Crackdown needs, or as you'll see, really is a game I should have done two videos about. So you're just going to get this, and I'm going to explain why throughout this, but I'm also going to explain kind of who Crackdown is for and why I came to this decision. So to get started, I guess we have to look at the prevailing narrative going into Crackdown 3. I think the thing that people were most worried about.
I've got the looks, I've got the brains, and I am the cute one. She's just my sister.
The first thing people noticed about early gameplay footage of Crackdown 3 was what appeared to be a significant graphical and aesthetic downgrade. The game looked like a straight-up PS2 release. I have to believe that was an earlier build of the game because my gameplay looked quite a bit different. Crackdown 3 ranges from looking like a gorgeous cel-shaded comic, as it does here, to looking like a AA early PS3 title. It is not at all the graphical nightmare it seemed to look like it was going to be in that early footage. Crackdown 3's world is downright beautiful at times. Gone is the more drab color palette of the first two games, that incessant feeling of darkness, it's not here. Instead, what we have is a color explosion that looks like it was ripped straight out of a romance between Dr. Seuss and Blade Runner 2049. Bright neon hues of green and yellow splash the skyline, mines are filled with glowing green minerals, holograms dance in bright oranges across the street from a sign advertising for cluster ducks with shades of blue. And yet you hop into interiors and there's those drab PS3 looking environments. Interiors are almost ubiquitously fatiguing, sterile marble environments, usually with a circular foundation, that all quickly blend together. There are some exceptions later in the game, but those exceptions are few and far between. Now, I spent my time playing on an Xbox One X, which features an X-enhanced version of the game, so I can't vouch for an OG Xbox One or an S, but what I will say is this. The world does feel developed, regardless of how it looks on your system. The world feels immersive. It is a relatively well-realized version of a corporatized, dictator-led dystopia. and it does indeed make exploring every nook and cranny for hidden orbs a lot less tedious than it could otherwise be. Speaking of, the game really wants you to explore its world. It almost makes it a requirement, even beyond the orbs. To unlock new agents, you have to find their DNA spread out across the world, which is a nice touch. And we'll get some more about this world a bit later, but now that I've addressed people's biggest concerns, or the one that's made the most rounds, at least on social media, I want to go ahead and talk about Crackdown 3's biggest downfall. The one thing that disappointed me more than anything else. The definition of
Did I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is? Insanity is.
I had a lot of fun playing this game, and I'll get back to the positives soon, but this cannot be ignored. Your Crackdown 3 experience is going to rely heavily on the games you've already played. Let me qualify that statement. One of the ways I know a game is losing me in particular is when it begins to make me want to play other games. Crackdown 3 is like another game that recently failed, but without the character. Agents of Mayhem. The same colorful, satirical open world, the same superhero slant, the same driving mechanics, and you might be thinking, but Crackdown did it first. And you'd be right. The problem is, games like Saints Row 4, Agents of Mayhem, Infamous, all do what Crackdown 3 does, but in maybe too many ways, a bit better. Even if Crackdown 3 does so much reasonably well. Crackdown's gameplay does indeed feel a bit archaic. Driving is an absolute chore. I'm talking tank GTA 4 level chore. It's almost completely pointless. Actual traversal is fun, it's weighty enough, it's just precise enough once you get a bit further into the game and unlock things like ground pound, but everything else feels so formulaic. Mission structure here is hop here, shoot this, platform this, with very little deviation, and by very little, I mean really the only deviation is what you're shooting at. Speaking of, shooting on normal difficulty is literally an afterthought, given that the auto lock-on is literally an auto-aim, like you've seen in a dozen games, which is meant to put the focus on movements, but instead trivializes combat a bit too much. Although the problem is, if you were to try not to use it, gunplay would become unwieldy, given the less than precise shooting mechanics on hand here. That is, once you get out of that auto-aim functionality. However, this does not mean Crackdown 3 is bad or isn't fun. That's not the case at all. But let me put it like this. If you're a big Crackdown fan and you are invested in the story and agency, you'll probably have this feeling significantly less often, a feeling like you'd rather be playing, again, something else. If you play very few open world games, the same will probably go to you, but if you've been around the block, you might struggle. One of the reasons this video might be the furthest that I review this game, or likely will be, is because I find that this reality would hang over any sort of review like an inescapable cloud. But Crackdown has also improved in quite a few ways that do help to offset that feeling a bit.
I'll be there someday. If I can be strong, I know every mile will be worth my while.
I know a lot of people want updated modern Crackdown, and in a lot of ways, that's exactly what you're going to get with some tweaks here. One tweak comes in the form of combat. It's a lot more RPG based than similar games. Numbers come flying off of bodies as they're littered with bullets, but better yet, the arsenal you have at your disposal is excellent. You have weapons that spray corrosive acid, laser guns with endless streams, arc rifles that shoot electric bolts, you name it, it's here. And better yet, the best way to unlock the best weapons is to find them hidden throughout the world, once again giving you an incentive to look around. From there, the weapons take the form of the elements. That aforementioned arc rifle will shock enemies, which can bring robotic enemies to a total stop for a couple of seconds. A Kairos shotgun can freeze your enemies in their place. Acid grenades will take down the shields of enemies carrying them. Essentially, there's a new elemental layer that is going to be required to master if you want to get through some of the more difficult sections of the game. I think better than that, Crackdown combat encounters do encourage you to really dig into your arsenal. Some enemies are immune to certain elements, some environments are built with little to no cover to encourage you to keep moving, and better still, one thing Crackdown 3 gets right is the steps it takes to encourage you to play it aggressively, to keep shooting to regain your health and your shield, Doom style. This is the way the game is best played. It's the way you should have been playing Crackdown all along, and might have been. The fact that the game understands its identity in this way is a big plus when it comes to larger firefights. It's also important to note that the little things, the side activities, are still good to great. Once you've gotten your agility level up a bit, Rooftop Races are tough but rewarding bits of puzzle platforming that are fun to complete. Small things like freeing prisoners will get you closer to completing your intel on what is essentially a map of villains that leads to the main baddie, and I can't stress this enough, besides a couple of things that I'll get to, Crackdown 3 is polished. The game works well, the frame rate is smooth, glitches were infrequent for me at least, and I never had any game-breaking or really even distracting issues. But I want to come back to that one reality I already discussed. Think about this Shadow of Mordor type ladder of enemies. Think about the Borderlands-style elemental weapons, and think about the fact that everything in Crackdown is something you've played before. In some ways, something you've already played in Crackdown games. And there is that thought looming over the head of the game once again. But that doesn't mean there weren't real issues that became more and more disconcerting the longer that I played the game. And some of these are hard to avoid given their near objective nature. Crackdown 3 plays and feels like a game that was supposed to come out 4 years ago. That's probably because it was. One of the main reasons for the delay was apparently Destruction and Cloud Tech. Destruction is a more multiplayer focused tech, because in single player it doesn't play nearly as big of a role, if any. There is no fall damage or even debris damage in the game, and thus the bit of destruction there is in the single player doesn't do much for the game in general, so even if you were taking down buildings left and right, which you really aren't, it wouldn't serve a huge function. It also doesn't help that the enemy AI isn't quite all there. Here is me doing what happens far too often, shooting an enemy in the back with one weapon, only to have it turn around only if I shoot it with a different weapon. Unfortunately, this happens a lot. Here is a clip of a boss fight. I am very exposed behind these pipes. The problem is, the enemies above, in front of, and beside me don't notice that, and they can't and refuse to hit me. There are quite a few important encounters in this game that end up falling apart thanks to these accidental encounter-breaking AI deficiencies. I think what's also mildly problematic is how repetitive Crackdown 3 can begin to feel towards the late game, especially if the story loses you. Almost every single activity you engage in to uncover intel and progress is a carbon copy of the last with a new skin. Breaking prisoners out, taking out metro stations, destroying mining equipment, hacking, hell, even destroying outposts. All of these things sound dramatically different, but the reality is they all require the exact same thing from you and only differ in the sense of what the end result is. It's all the same gameplay loop with, again, no variation. Crackdown 3 feels a lot like the pursuit of technological progress left the studio more focused on the market-speak, tech demo, cloud destruction side of the game, instead of expounding on what it means to actually make a game underneath the tech. And that's not to say there is no game here, it's just to say that it seems like that technology took away from that game a bit. I will say that co-op play would significantly increase enjoyment of the game if that's your thing. Making your own fun in this world with a friend is probably going to be a better experience for you than going at it alone. Some of the late game mechs and enemies, which by the way are excellent in terms of their variety, almost beg for co-op play, so keep that in mind as well. This is also the one thing that keeps combat interesting for so long, it's the enemy variety. You may be repeating the same tasks, but that enemy variety will keep you on your toes and is fun to deal with. Yet, no matter how much I played, no matter how many of the Terra Nova came after me when my pseudo wanted level got too high, I never truly felt like I was affecting the world or eating into these enemies. They always felt like fodder. So let me explain why I came to the conclusion I did about doing a full, highly edited review down the line, examining the game in great detail with multiplayer in tow. What changed my mind?
Hey, Vegeta.
Why?
Stop hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself.
So let me go back to the original plan. The original plan was, again, to make a video, an impressions video of Crackdown 3 after my first couple hours of it or so, just to let you guys know how I was feeling in a cursory fashion when I first started, and then down the line, a couple days later, make a full review, highly edited video, whatever you want to call it, about the game, and really break down what this game meant and kind of be able to, in some ways, recommend it to you or whoever's watching. But then I realized that this video was going to be the only way that I could do that. So why would I be doing that full quote-unquote review of the game? Well, let's ignore the first reality that I've already discussed of that feeling of deja vu and move on to the reality of this situation. I don't know how someone reviews Crackdown 3 or applies a score to this game. Crackdown 3 is good. It is fun, it is enjoyable, but I also find myself thinking and damn near knowing that I'll likely never want to play this game again. Now, when I say that, I don't mean I don't want to play it now. I mean that once I'm finished with it, I'll be finished with it for good. And I know you as a gamer know what that feeling is like. The problem with reviews is that to me, they often feel like recommendations. Like I just said, they feel like a seal of approval as to whether or not someone should buy something. And when it comes to Crackdown 3, I have no way to do that. I want so badly to say you should buy and play this game because I know for a fact how much fun there is to be had here. But I simply can't say you should buy this game over any other open world game to release over the past 2 years. Sure, I could spend a bunch of time chronicling the numerous delays, the dev cycle, the destruction tech, but I'm not sure that in the case of Crackdown 3, any of that will matter to you when it comes to purchasing decisions. I don't feel negatively towards the game in any way, honestly. It's a feeling of middling indifference that would make it hard for me to spend more time in the world, all in an effort to try to place some sort of artificial title on it that would range anywhere outside of the realm of that indifference. The story left me feeling indifferent, the mission structure, the gameplay in some ways. Doesn't make it bad, the game is not at all bad, but I'm not sure that makes it great either. It's also important to note that given how early I got my hands on the game, I wasn't able to truly experience everything that the game has to offer in terms of the multiplayer, and while I know that isn't a massive part of the Crackdown experience, that is where the destruction is really supposed to matter. And I know that mode will likely be largely ignored, whether it deserves to be or not, and I know I could hop in post-release, but the problem is, the early impressions of the multiplayer cite the destruction as having no actual effect on gameplay, something I felt in the single player, and which may end up defeating its purpose. But I obviously can't make that call until having played a significant amount of time of that multiplayer. Crackdown 3 is going to please a lot of people, especially the people that have anxiously waited 6 years for its release, and it will likely live a long life thanks to its Xbox exclusivity, as it joins a small family built for people very excited for their system's releases. I am, however, left wondering that if Crackdown 3 was not an Xbox exclusive, whether or not anyone would care at all. I think the answer is still yes. Marginally, I do think there's a market for these kinds of games, but I do not think that this is quite the exclusive that Microsoft was hoping for, especially not after all this time. I do not believe that the delays were kind to Crackdown 3's position in the market, and I honestly believe that there's a large group of people that are going to miss out on some fun because they've either entirely forgotten the game exists or completely moved past it. I have a lot of problems with the game, but most of them are just middling, why am I playing this instead of something else problems. Most of the problems are simply that Crackdown 3 is, at the end of the day, above average, mediocre, bordering on good. Maybe it is good, but it's one of those things. I don't think it's anything more or anything less. I don't at all regret my time with the game. I had a lot of fun, but I was ready to be done with the game by the time I put the controller down, and I think that should be a reasonable expectation going into purchasing the game. Crackdown 3 is here, but for once, you really should decide for yourself whether or not it was worth the wait. Well guys, that is it for today's doc, and as always, sort of a dialogue. What do you think about Crackdown 3 as it is in its pre-release state, I guess? In the sense that, is this something you're interested in purchasing? Is this something you're interested in spending your time with? Have you played Crackdown 1 or 2? Are you the person that it sounds like Crackdown is for? Don't get me wrong, I want to make this very clear again. I don't think Crackdown 3 is bad at all. In fact, I really enjoyed my time with it. Although, as an objective piece of entertainment, I'm not sure that it's a great game, but regardless, I think there's a lot of people that are going to have a lot of fun with this game. Because if you're someone that just wants to jump around and shoot things and be a superhero, this is going to be perfect for that. Is it the best game of its kind? No. But I do think that there's a lot of people that are going to enjoy this game, and I don't think that this whole "it's terrible" narrative is going to prevail once, the review embargo for people that didn't buy the game does break. But anyways, that's not the point. Maybe I'll be the person that likes it the most. I don't know. But regardless, do you fall into the camp of people that you think, based on this video, are going to be someone that enjoys Crackdown 3? Let me know the answer to any of those questions down in the comments below. Let's have a real conversation. As always, if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button. If you're not yet a member of this team, press subscribe. I put out gaming analysis and examinations multiple times a week. So hit subscribe so you do not miss any of those. As always, my Twitter handle will be in the top pinned comment down below. It's there where you can find out what games I'm playing, what games I've gotten my hands on early, whatever it is. You can find it out there below. Follow me on that Twitter handle. I don't know why I had trouble getting that. For those of you that are going to inevitably ask, how often are people able to buy games early? It depends on where you live. For me, this is actually a much easier route than waiting for a review copy, simply because I sometimes can go into a store in Manhattan and get games before I would even get a review copy, which gives me a lot more time to kind of sit on the game and play it and take my time with it. And in this case, I was able to get this game well before some other people that I know because of that. And it also helps not to be embargoed, and it helps to be able to talk about what I want to talk about when I want to talk about. But yeah, places like LA and Manhattan, they have mom and pop stores that just don't care about street date. And that's how this works. So anyways, until next time, guys, I'm out.